This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another Ask Prof Wolff question. This one comes from Sega. And Sega asks about recent reports that major funding foundations, and Sega mentions the Hewlett Foundation as one that I've heard of as well, are doing something interesting. They're spending millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars supporting research, study, all kinds of efforts, which are interesting because they recognize the failures of capitalism around the world in recent decades. They particularly pinpoint neoliberalism, that phase of modern capitalism, usually dated starting around the 1970s, in which we were told that making everything private would be wonderful for the economy. Globalizing would be wonderful. We should celebrate having the government be less, do less, and having the private sector be more, do more, and likewise encouraging our businesses to invest abroad, move abroad. All of that would be beneficial for everybody. Hewlett Foundation and others like them are now facing up to what critics have been saying all along, that this was an illusion, that this neoliberalism, this shift to the private, this globalization was good for some people, business, corporations, big business in particular, and the rich who invested in those big businesses. But for the average person, no. And here's what the critics point to, which the Hewlett Foundation now admits, that over the last 30, 40 years of the neoliberal age, inequality inside virtually every country got worse. Globalization meant that some people got more jobs, but a lot of people lost their jobs. That economic crashes became more numerous and worse and deeper. That social divisions in our societies got worse. That racism and white supremacy had a resurgence. There were a lot of things that didn't work out real well, and they admit that. And they say they're going to fix it. They're going to study it, and they're going to fix it. In some language, it's capitalism was bad, and we're going to make it good now. Or if I can quote Robert Reich, we're going to save capitalism, even when we make a joking aside, save it from its own worst instincts, save it from itself. And Sega wonders whether this is real, whether this is phony, whether this is going to do something for African Americans who have so often ended up at the bottom of the economic performance. Wow, good question. But I think the answer may upset you. I don't think anything here is going to happen that changes anything, because these kinds of reform efforts, they're very old in the history of capitalism. They have happened again and again. You know, capitalism goes through phases where it is a bit frightened about opposition to itself, so it makes accommodations. You know, in the Great Depression of the 1930s, the capitalist system was afraid it was going to be shoved aside, thrown on the dust heap of history. And so it let Americans have Social Security and unemployment compensation and a minimum wage and government jobs if there weren't private sector jobs. But that same capitalism, once the danger passed, took most of that back. And that's what capitalism does. It has phases of being hard-nosed and tough, but when it goes too far in that direction, then it backs up and is generous and kind. But even when it's generous and kind, pretty soon, if that costs them money, they become hard-nosed. I remember learning that years ago when I noticed working with a few boards of directors of corporations, that they were always divided, those boards. They have 10 or 20 people on them. There'd be those who said, we can stick it to the workers, we can get more profit, let's not give them anything, let's not give them a time off. And then the others said, no, don't do that, you'll provoke them. They'll be angry. They'll throw a monkey wrench into the works. Don't do it. Be nice, be gentle. Give them time off. Put flowers in the vases, etc. And there was a back and forth. And when one kind of guy or woman, when there were a few, got into positions of power, they'd do it their way. And if they went too far, then they'd back off, and the other part of the board would come in. Back and forth. Capitalism, always the same small group of people making the same decisions, trying to make the business profitable. They disagree on how you treat the people under them, but the basic story doesn't change. So I think it's delusional to imagine that the Hewlett Foundation is going to discover how to save capitalism from itself. Perfectly smart people just like them tried that many times in the history of capitalism. It never happened, or if it didn't happen, it didn't last very long. Look at how the achievements of the Great Depression were undone in the last 40 years, in most cases. If you want to get a better system, you got to face what the Hewlett Foundation and the others won't, that the problem is capitalism itself. The problem is having a tiny group of very wealthy people sitting at the top of every store, factory, or office making the decisions. Yeah, sometimes they'll be nicer, sometimes they won't be quite as harsh, but it never lasts very long, because the ultimate goal of making money for them at the expense of everybody else doesn't really change, unless you change the organization of enterprises. If you democratize the enterprise, then it'll serve the people. But then you have to put the people in charge of the enterprise, or else it'll only serve the people who run it, those at the top. There's no escape from that reality until you go beyond capitalism, which is why that's the issue for our time. If these kinds of conversations strike you as valuable, please partner with us. Share these videos with friends, family, and coworkers. It's a way for you and we to work together to change things finally. And of course, if you can help us financially, please go to our website. You'll see there how to do it, and we will be grateful for that kind of partnership as well. Thank you.